to meeting attendees that this is a formal meeting and that members of the public will be given an opportunity to speak during public open session, but not at other times. The meeting is being filmed, and by being present, attendees are deemed to have agreed to be filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings. Attendees should not disclose any personal information of individuals, as this will infringe the data protection rights of that individual, and please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Albone. Any other apologies? No. Okay. Moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any disclosable or pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in any item on the agenda? Councillor Russell.
I assume we still have the, I can't remember what it's called, but because we're all affected by the council tax, we have to have a special dispensation, and I think that's in place until next year's election. Am I right, Mr. Clark? Yeah, because otherwise we would all have to declare an interest.
Of course, yep. To be recorded. Anything else? No. Move on then to Chairman's announcements. I've got no announcements. So we'll move on to public open session. Are there any members of the public online? No, and no one in the room. So we'll move on to item 5 with no invited speaker. Item 6, any members' questions? Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. We got the AGAR report, I think it's called, at the end of September, and circulated internally to members. I understood that it's meant to be published and discussed in full council. I had been hoping that at least we'd have seen it by now at a council meeting or here. I thought tonight it would be that if we hadn't had it, was waiting for this meeting. But surely it should be a matter in the public and brought out and produced to council formally.
I believe it should come forward, and also the external audit report at some point. I'm guessing we're expecting, are we not?
Both items are being shared externally on the website, consistent with what we're required to do. I've not known them to come back to council after they were brought through the AGAR before, but we can do.
So I don't believe the external audit report's ever been brought to council, so it ought to be.
Okay.
Matter of a point of record, I think it has always come to council in previous years, and this is the first time it hasn't come to council in my memory, and it extends quite a long time.
Yeah, so I think we'll ask if that can be on the council agenda. Thank you. Any other members' questions? No. Okay, we'll move on to the minutes and recommendations of meetings. So first we'll look at the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of July. So for accuracy, on page 5 of the reports, 6, 7, 8, page 9. Does anyone want to move that? Thank you, Councillor Fage. All in favour of that? Thank you. And then minutes of the meeting of the 6th of September for accuracy on page 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and 16.
Proof that it's an accurate record.
Okay. All in favour? Yeah. Thank you. So then we move on to item 8, matters arising. Any matters arising from the meeting on the 5th of July? Or any matters arising for the meeting on the 6th of September? Nope. Okay. So we'll move on then to item 9A, items for consideration, the original estimate. So we've got a written report from the clerk. Are there any questions or comments from members? Councillor Fage.
Thank you for this report at such an early stage. This is the earliest we've had sight of what our precept will, could potentially look like for next year. By that I mean in previous years it's always come later traditionally. So to get sight of this in November, I think gives us plenty of time and breathing space between now and the end of January when we actually set the precept. I think look, it's pretty obvious that there are quite significant cost pressures, particularly on the wage side, given that our biggest outgoing as a council is is the cost of employing people, and the cost of employing people is going up. Some of that is down to the pay settlement that we expect to see, but other factors as well. I think we don't need to make a decision tonight, I'm right in thinking, but just from my understanding, so we're not directly impacted, I hope, by our energy and electric costs, because they are more or less fixed until 2025, which is at least some sort of tempering measure, if you like, which stops us going even higher with a precept increase. Just, I think something that I would be really keen to see when we come to discuss this in January is, if we're looking at X%, in real layman's terms, so that I could explain it to, my nan. If we're looking at, let's say, 9%, what is 4% for staff, 3% for these extra responsibilities that we're taking on, and then a further 2% for something else. I think that understanding it in that, like in terms as simple as that, would help to inform decision making, so that we know what the delta is year on year. But thank you for the report. I think we probably can note it for now, although noting that these numbers are higher than in the ideal world they would be, but we are where we are.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
I thought we were supposed to be making a recommendation to council tonight. Is there another F&GP meeting before the precept meeting?
No.
No, I didn't think there was, in which case I'd like to propose that we recommend to council option 2. And the reason I'm proposing that is that we have had plenty of time to go through these figures as a group of councillors, and plenty of time to ask questions. We've taken things out of this budget which we didn't want to take out, which are things that impact on what we can do for people in Biggleswade. We've pared it down as much as we can. It's not the kind of sum of money I would like to see. That kind of 9.95% increase is much more than I would have wanted to see. But these are very unusual times. As Councillor Fage has already said, we're bound by the national pay settlement, and we have to implement that, and that was only released a few weeks ago but backdated. That then impacts on next year's budget, and we still don't know what pay settlement might be awarded next year, because the way things are, inflation may still be quite high. We must have the new vehicles. We can't do the job of looking after the town in the way that the public expects without those 2 new leased vehicles, or without the lease on the mower. And the budget is going for a lease rather than buying, because that's a cheaper way forward in the short term. So I think that we do need to make a recommendation to council, and I propose that we recommend option 2 at 9.95%. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor North. Councillor Foster.
I may be wrong, but it seems to me that we've got a F&GP meeting on the 17th of January, so I don't see what the urgency is. I think we need to reflect on this, and I'm certainly not going to be supporting a rushing through of a decision, whether we've had the information or not. I don't think the information that we've got is sufficient for us to be able to make a value judgment. Unless there's a meeting that's changed that I'm not aware of. I've got
no, I did think there was, but the clerk was said there wasn't.
So on that basis, yeah. I think Councillor Fage has expressed it very well. It would be helpful for the committee and wider councillors and the public to understand what our pressures are. What's the cause of the required increase of either £142,000 or £185,000 on our precept? What's the reason for that? So we can justify it. If it is that amount, what's the reason for it? So at the moment, I'm certainly won't be supporting just pushing something through tonight.
Councillor Russell, with that in mind, bearing in mind you believed it was the last meeting and information may change to change the figures before the 17th. Do you want to keep your resolution or withdraw it?
I want to keep it, even if it's voted down, because I think it's the right thing to do. okay, we can try and put more information together that makes the budget more transparent for members of the public. But as councillors, we have had plenty of chance to look at this. We've all had a chance to look at it. And I'm convinced that this is the right way forward, because we need to maintain the level of service that members of the public expect. It's a large amount in percentage terms. It's not a large amount in cash terms. 35 pence per week for a Band D property is not excessive given everything else that's going on. Yes, there may be more information come forward, but that can come forward to the pre-setting meeting of council. We don't really need to have another meeting as close to council as that. So at the moment, I'd like to test the water and keep the motion on the table.
Any further comments, Councillor Strawn?
A couple of points. One observation. I note the very final sentence of the report from the clerk. It says this includes any unreasonable or unplanned demands upon the general reserve. I understand the unplanned part, but what is an unreasonable demand? Who's going to be making it? Because I don't believe this council will make unreasonable demands. So what kind of unreasonable demands will there be? I understand where Councillor Russell's coming from in her part, but if we have got another F&GP meeting, whilst I think the option 2 is probably the one that I would end up supporting overall, because I think that there's enough burdens on the people at the moment and it's higher than I would like. But I think should be rather on Councillor Fage's point, it needs to be spelt out in figures of one syllable or so to speak, so that everybody can understand and explain it, rather than when you look at the budget overall, normally it's so convoluted. It's not easy to explain to anybody else, even if we've understood it. So, but perhaps, but I'd still like to know who is going to make the unreasonable demands upon the general reserve.
Mark, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll respond to a number of things really. Firstly, I think there's been a very full and transparent sharing of information with chairs of individual committees and indeed with the broader members, in the spirit of transparency, and trying to give you as much information as early as possible to aid the decision making and to also aid the critique process as well as. Very happy to add any further information to clarify what we're asking. So very happy to respond to Councillor Fage's expression. I don't believe that there's going to be any significant changes in the kind of quantum of financial information that's out there, but we can delay this if we wanted to. However, I wanted to give you the information as soon as was possible and in as much depth as possible to allow you to make the decision when you feel able. When you read this report, one of the things that it draws your attention to is that good practice is basically setting our general reserves at 3 months of our net revenue. I have the reserves policy on my right-hand side here. There would be, even if you go with option 1 or option 2, it effectively means setting a reserve that is less than good practice. Our current reserves are consistent with our policy. However, as an RFO, I've always been concerned associated with it that we should have enough money set aside. And yes, it ticks the box, but I would love to have some more general reserves to protect us going forward. So I'm very cautious that as much as members have given us a broad sense of what they feel comfortable with in regard to budget pressures, there was a very, very detailed paper that broke down all of the potential cost pressures in the new financial year. And there are a lot there. A small group of that was recommended to go into this paper, but there's a lot of issues there. And I could go into detail now, but perhaps this isn't perhaps the right setting to say that some of these things may well hit us. And if they hit us with a very, very tight budget, you've got one place to go, and that's your general reserves. Thank you.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you for the paper. So firstly, I came to tonight's meeting expecting to consider the recommendation, which is to note the contents of this report. And the preparation I did was consistent with that. So I'm a little concerned to hear the clerk suggesting we could delay a decision when actually the agenda calls for us to note a recommendation, not to make a decision. So in fact, the proposal that's been seconded would actually be to hasten the decision, not, and what my view is that's not appropriate, and we should stick to the original plan, which is to consider this formally at FNGP in January. Anyway, the point of my question, page 21, even if option 2 is preferred, there are risks and consequences, and these include this budget, option 2, would not allow for any further in-year cost reductions or efficiency savings. I don't fully understand that. Could the clerk explain that to me, please?
Me too. Yeah. So for the last 2 years, we've been very conscious that we should try and save, to reduce our commitments and to make efficiency savings where we're able to. In the previous year, we found a sum of money of 25,300, which was consistent with what was required. In these papers, we have driven this really, really hard. We have got the budget down to its lowest possible level, we believe, at this point in time. We've saved another 37,300, if I recall. Yep. What I'm effectively saying here is that there will be potential for our contracts, but of course, price inflation is hitting us at the moment. It doesn't give us a great deal of leeway to go further into the bone here. And that's what I'm saying.
Okay, I find that surprising because a budget of 1.56 million, I'd find it hard to argue no further savings could be made. But I guess we'll have to agree to disagree.
Councillor Storm, were you waiting to speak?
Yes, thank you. I take the clerk's answer as saying the unreasonable elements are the fact that the demands might grow without from external sources rather than from. Well, what do you mean?
In part, you're right, Councillor Strawn, but the paper that I shared with members previously gave a very detailed breakdown of all of our cost pressures. Some members gave us an indication of those things that they believe that they wanted to prioritise. I'm saying that those cost pressures still exist.
Sorry, you're missing the point. The word unreasonable is used specifically in the report. Now, I said who is going to make those unreasonable demands? You haven't answered with respect to that question. You've said what you've presented in the past, and I accept that fully. And we've taken all that into account when coming to this agenda. But you're implying that there are other unreasonable demands that may be made. So who's going to be making them?
What I'm saying to you is that there is a significant element of cost pressures that so far we haven't included in the budget. They may hit us. They will then become, use the word unreasonable. They will significantly impact upon the budget. They may do.
I think, Councillor Storm, you've made your point. I think others have taken it on board. Councillor Russell.
I've just been thinking about the timetable that colleagues want to follow. And if we've got an FNGP meeting on the 17th, it allows 2 days to make any changes to the budget before the papers have to go out for the precept meeting, which is why I think it was far better to grasp the nettle tonight, because however much this is explained, however much detail there is, we have seen that as councillors, and we have seen that long list of pressures. We have taken out 85% of what is possible pressures there to try and keep the precept down. You know, we're just, if council doesn't, if this committee doesn't make a recommendation to council tonight, it's just putting off the evil hour. But there is very little time between that scheduled FNGP meeting and council to make any changes. And I think the clerk's already said that there's highly unlikely to be a lot of new information coming our way.
Okay, Councillor North.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Knight may be right about procedures and exact wording of the motion, but I think Councillor Russell has a very important point about the time factor involved in this. Secondly, I would say anybody who's hoping that we're going to end up with a lower precept than this, I think are going to be gravely disappointed. In fact, if there are any changes between now and whenever it was, the 14th of January, it's likely to be an increase in the recommendation, I would suggest. And the other point I would make is I don't feel very comfortable about what the clerk has described about the running down or indeed below policy level of the reserve. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should include in the budget a provision for maintaining the reserve at the level that our policy indicates that it should be.
Councillor Foster.
Perhaps Councillor North could explain to me why the numbers would increase in January if we decided not to make a decision tonight. I'd like to understand why that would be the case. It doesn't make any sense to me.
May I respond to that, Chairman?
Councillor.
Well, for the reasons that the clerk, within the last few minutes, has described, that all these factors are coming in, and contingencies that may happen, some of which are listed in this list on page 21. And if things happen that are not really being allowed for yet, an increased cost that would go into the budget as a known cost that we're going to have to meet, rather than a contingency that we may have to meet.
Okay, so if I can just add to that, I think one thing that we will know, and we'll be closer to the end of the year and have a closer idea of where we are on the outturn for the year, and whether that might actually give us a greater surplus at the end of this financial year, which might mean we don't need to increase the preset by as much. So it could, I think it is possible the requirement might go down if we continue and manage to not spend as much in the next 2 months. So there are circumstances there. And I mean, I think from the chair, my view is, I think it's important that FNGP make a recommendation. I think there's a timetable that we had already agreed that we would make that recommendation on the 17th of January. And therefore, I think that's the timetable we ought to follow, rather than determining something early. And then if circumstances change, we're bound by a decision that's already been made.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. You mentioned the fact that there might be a greater surplus than we're anticipating at the moment. Now, if we have a greater surplus, and I'm not suggesting that would affect the budgeting overall, but would that not improve our reserve position, because the surplus would top up the reserve, hopefully to take us above the minimum level that's needed? So if we're anticipating that there's going to be a surplus better than anticipated, that is a reason for us to be optimistic. Doesn't necessarily mean we should make any changes to the actual precept that we take, but it does give it's something that we should be bearing in mind.
Any other comments? In which case, I think we'll move to a vote. So the proposal is that we make a recommendation to council to accept option 2 for the precepts. All those in favour of that? Those against? Okay, so that's defeated 5-3. Councillor Fage.
I propose that we just note this for now, that we make the decision on the 17th of January.
Okay, seconder for that, Councillor Knight. All in favour of that? Okay, thank you. Any against? Move on then to item 10A, I believe. Yep, which is the finance review report. Any questions or comments from members? All in. Oh.
Note the good progress.
Okay, thank you. All in favour of that? Thank you. Move on to item 10B, which is a report on the move to Unity Trust Bank. Any comments or questions from members? Councillor Strawn.
Thank you. I noted the comments about informing customers of bank change. I imagine that with the normal course of changing bank accounts, when we do change bank accounts, monies that go accidentally to the old account will automatically be transferred to the new. So it's not a disaster if we haven't been able to inform everybody of the change of bank accounts.
I believe it's for about 2 or 3 years, but Mr. Youngs, can you confirm?
Yeah, it's 3 years, 36 months. Yep.
Okay. Do we note that?
Note the good progress.
Thank you. All in favour of noting it? Yep, thank you. Move on to item 10C, utilities contracts. Any comments or questions on this? Do we want to note it? Oh, Councillor Strawn.
Sorry. we've got I'm a bit confused over the fixed contract prices because it keeps on making reference to changes in there, but we've got a fixed price until April 2025. So what is the situation there? Have we actually got the fixed price, or are we going to be subject to changes? Because there was an implication in there, in this report, that we might have to pay more.
Mr. Tarrant.
So you're right, there's a kind of interesting quandary in the report. The first thing, of course, is that we thought we had a fixed price before. And then we had a kind of unilateral response from the supplier that effectively their company was folding and they were changing the circumstances, and then they withdrew from that fixed price, which, yeah, we now have a secondary fixed price, which is supposed to be a fixed price until circumstances change and the market, if it, you know, evolves into something else. So you're right, circumstances have changed, and we hope in this particular instance the company will be robust and it will continue as a fixed price, but there is some danger connected to it.
So in other words, we have got a fixed price contract providing the supplier remains in business.
Councillor Bond.
What are we paying for electricity per kilowatt hour?
Sorry, I don't have that information. Sorry. Yeah, can certainly find out.
Councillor Knight.
Thanks. I guess I'm a bit confused. So our gas supplier didn't go bust, but a supplier to them did, and therefore they put our prices up, although it was a fixed contract. So are they claiming force majeure, or do we need to get someone to review this contract and see if they've acted within the contract?
Through talking to them, I was told that if the contract, if we didn't accept the contract, then basically they would be going out of business. So it was that severe.
I doubt we're their only customer, and I doubt us refusing to accept a price rise on a fixed contract will put them out of business unless they were perilously close.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm misleading you. I mean that if the price wasn't increased to that amount, that they would be going out of business across all their customers.
I'm still confused. So we chose to accept this increase to try to save them? Did we have a choice?
I'm sure that we would have had a choice. That this would have happened, I'm sorry, but before I was here.
Okay, maybe we need to take it offline. I guess I'd like a little bit more detail because it sounds strange. To my mind, when you have a fixed price contract, that price is either honoured or your supplier goes bust and you have to find another supplier. This seems a strange middle ground, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Thank you.
Councillor Bond.
How long have we been aware of this? Because I think it was probably last FNGP or fairly recently, I asked a question about our pricing. I was told we were secure with our fixed price contract. So this seems to be a recent occurrence that we are now aware we have a problem.
Should we bring this to council?
Yeah, I think, is that a proposal to defer to council?
Before we speculate further, can I propose you bring this to council under exempt?
Yeah, thank you. All in favour of
on the 13th of December.
Council? Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 10D, credit control policy. Any questions or comments? Councillor Strawn.
Right, I think it's very encouraging that the debt is as low as this. I was just wondering how much of this debt and generally is within 30 days and how much is over 30 days.
So by overdue, we mean by 30 days overdue.
Right, so in that case, I'll just take it to the next stage, I'm afraid, just to be really pedantic. How much is 60 days overdue?
I would have to have a look at the ledgers to be able to provide that.
Thank you. It might be useful just to know that we're not, how much is becoming long-term and requires the other action as specified in the report.
Okay. Councillor Page.
No, I was just going to say, if this is a policy, is this something which is purely operational, or is this something that would a policy? The word policy flashes in front of me a little bit, and I think should this have been seen by the committee? Not that there's anything in here that I disagree with, by the way. It's just, I think over time, we're trying to build up a set of policies that govern the way in which we run. Where's it stored? Is it on our website? And should it have been passed by us first? I don't know.
So I've been advised by the clerk that this will formally go to council for approval at some point. And this is a heads up. 2 comments I would make though, from the chair. In paragraph 3 of the policy where it says some larger suppliers, that should be customers if it's a credit control policy. And then just in regard to the 4th stage chasing, just if we can compare with financial regulations, etc., around and standing orders. I think there's something in there around taking legal action and authority to do so, and also around write-offs, just to make sure that it's aligned with whatever is in the existing documents.
Quick observation and a thank you. I just wanted to thank Rob and particularly our Tracy and the accounts for making such an effort to control our debt, which has gone down, I would say, approximately 70 to 80%. So they've done a really good job, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, minute that.
Yeah. Any other comments on that report? Are we noting it? Oh, yeah.
In terms of the 8% above base rate, is that something that is going to come to council in terms of why 8% above the base rate? Is there a consistent? Is there a reason for that particular percentage? What governs it?
So my understanding is that's general legislation limits it to be 8% that a company can charge in interest above Bank of England rate as a penalty effectively for people being late paying. So it's quite, in most of the contracts you probably have, it says the same. Doesn't always get enforced, but it is in there. Okay, so happy to know that, yes. Okay, thank you. So we move on to item 10E, the Vermont's quarterly report. Any comments, or do we note it?
Yeah. Thank you for the report.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us on to the risk management update report, item 10F. Any comments from members?
Can't wait.
I've just got 2 comments to make. One, can we make it clear that it's Councillor Grantfage? And second, I'm sure your mum would really want to be involved in it.
That'd wake up.
The second is just in terms of the timelines, bearing in mind we're coming into December and obviously the time, whether it might actually need to push back to February before we actually bring it to council. But I think we should need to get on with it, but it's just in terms of when we actually get it back, it might take a little bit longer than that. Councillor Foster.
Just a couple of things. Councillors has got 2 hours in it, really very pedantic, number 1. And number 2, for me, it should, I would have expected it to refer to the individual titles rather than the names of the councillors. So the mayor and the chair of FNGP rather than individual named councillors. But it's not entirely appropriate necessarily, but
I could answer that, and the reason it's councillors Fage and Pullinger is actually this was something that was delegated to ourselves in the last year. So Councillor Fage wasn't actually the mayor at that time. It was down to our expertise as opposed to our roles on council.
I stand corrected.
Expectation management, please, Councillor.
Okay, so we're noting the report.
Note
Yes? Thank you. Okay, I assume there's no more members of the public decided to watch us rather than the England match. There were no exempt items, so I close the meeting. Thank you, everyone. 34 minutes. Could have done better.
I do think that if it can, in January, there's a fair chance, I think, that have come in higher. Do you understand what the point I'm making?
I mean, deliberately not setting it at the F&GP making recommendation on that Tuesday when we're talking